Hello everyone, regards from Indonesia. I'm the Alita Marsanty, would like to present my team and me a paper titled The Impact of Indonesian Polarization Phenomenon on Javanese Voting Behavior in the 2024 election. Then it's starting from the current political situation in Indonesia. Indonesian 2024 election is nowhere in sight, but the buzzword has already been revolving around newspaper headlines. Euphoria for the 2024 candidate arguably is an accumulation of public disappointment for the last two elections in 2014 and 2019 and its aftermath during the time of political consolidation. Polarization created the both candidate then compounded with dramatic and sentimental race. The defeat presidential candidate Mr. Prabowo joined with Mr. Joko Widodo coalition and left the angry supporter behind. The sudden companionship between Widodo's coalition and Subianto's Gerindra party also disappointing Mr. Joko's supporter. And this study will discuss how the polarization that occurs shapes the behavior of voters in determining their choices in the 2024 presidential candidate. In addition, this study also seeks to understand the direction of the people's political preference on the island of Java. Therefore, it is important and relevant for the 2024 presidential and vice presidential candidates to understand the characteristics and political orientation of the Javanese people as the key to winning the national political battle in the future. And based on explanation above, this section outlines the theoretical context of this paper concerning current state of Indonesia political condition, particularly at voting behavior amid the thick polarization and engaged side of the triggers of voting behavior on Javanese people as a largest community in Indonesia. Moreover, this paper forecasting the future leader criteria needed by Javanese people. The first concept is polarization. Polarization can help to strengthen political parties and institutionalize party systems because it enables them to mobilize voters around identifiable differences. Polarizing challenger often provoke an elite backlash and counter-mobilization to stem their transformative attempt rather than a recognition of their reformist and inclusionary potential in building a constructively agnostic and pluralist democracy. However, polarizing politics always carries the risk of taking on a life of its own, eviscerating cross-cutting ties and non-participant channels for compromise and becoming pernicious. Personal perception and judgment of candidates, personal perception and assessment of issues raised, and party identification or partisanship are some of international factors that shapes voters' choices within this framework. Furthermore, there are three main objects that voters see. That voters see, evaluate, and respond to when making decisions. There are political parties, political issue, and political candidate. And the second concept are voting behavior. According to Towns, voting behavior is broadly defined as an act of participating in decision-making activities that they believe are the most suitable or preferred to be chosen. Existing approaches differ in terms of underlying theories of human behavior, with the primary sources of such theories being economics, psychology, and sociology. It shows that vote decisions do not occur on their own, yet are based on people's experiences. Voters' tendency in making a decision is influenced by the ideal perspective from their social environment. As a result, they would support a candidate who has a connection to the group that generally refers to socioeconomic status, religion, and regional characteristics. About Indonesia voting behavior, once Gafar examines that Javanese political participation and voting behavior lean on political flows socio-religious context, whereas the socio-personal context is derived from paternalistic relationship. However, William Liddell and Saiful Mujani arrived at the opposite. Based on legislative and presidential election from 1919 to 2004, they found that sociological models were underutilized during the reform era. And for the voting behavior, we focus on physiological model. This model is based on idea that a person's election decisions are influenced by social communities and cognitive motives. There are three main objects that voters see, evaluate, and respond to when making decisions. There are party identification. It's a psychological relationship between individuals and the parties they support. Therefore, a party is organized by members that have same value and ideal. This second character is candidate identification. It's like party identification, but the voter believe in the candidate's personal ability to bring good to society, to lead in an instrumental quality. The quality of figure often determines choice decision rather than issues. And the last is issue identification. According to Roth, the identification of an issue is the more voters believe specific issues are necessary, the more likely they will continue to participate in a more important election. And here's the figure of our conceptual framework. Start with polarization and voting behavior, and then we conclude that we should find alternative figure. The next slide is about method. The purpose of this study is to gain insight about Japanese voters' preferences toward the 2024 presidential candidates. For this research, the qualitative method appears to be the most appropriate tool to gain a broad range of perspective among Japanese voters toward their preferences about 2024 presidential candidates. And now we are going to discussion section. It starts from polarization in Indonesia. Well, exactly, polarization in Indonesia politics is not a new phenomenon. Political polarization in the early days of the state was centered on the relationship between religion and state. Santri, Abangan, and Priari are the three groups of the public and the elite. However, during the New Order era, the ideological debate over the relationship between religion and state faded away. Polarization in Indonesia then reached a new peak in the 2019 presidential election, when Joko Widodo and Prabowo Subianto faced off again. And derived from thematic analysis in focus group discussion, there is a similar pattern of appraisal for both Prabowo and Jokowi from respondents that affect their preferences for the 2024 presidential candidate. Japanese voters rely heavily on their perception of Jokowi's current performance and persona in drawing their preferences for the next president. According to the respondent, in almost all parts of Java, Jokowi's performance in his second term has been declining. From the appraisal, Japanese voters now wish for a rather more bold persona to lead the nation in the future. Jokowi's ambiguity between his modest appearances and his unpopular policy left voters with regrets and sought for an assertive leader with less gimmick and lip service. On the other hand, although Javanese voters show a lack of sympathy for President Jokowi's performance, they are still in favor of his merakyat traits, a down-to-earth, modest persona. However, for the next president, they prefer to have a merakyat leader who cannot only be seen from his appearances, but also his policy and his action. As for Jokowi ex-contender Mr. Prabowo, who still holds top position in several polls, also perceived negatively among Javanese voters. Javanese voters see Prabowo as a pragmatic politician who only cares for himself, as he is now also serving Jokowi's government and even allegedly involved in a corruption case. From this perspective, we have seen that both central figures from the 2019 election have declining support in almost all parts of Java, the center of Indonesia's electoral vote. Javanese voters now prefer a new and fresh candidate that would heal their disappointment to both 2019 candidates. For the conclusion, we state that the polarization occur in Indonesia, harm democracy, and contribute to public dissatisfaction with the system. As a result, they polarize their thinking and fail to see the big picture. In this situation, the emergence of new political figure as an alternative is required to raise people's awareness of politics and democracy in Indonesia, particularly among the Javanese. Currently, Javanese society defines candidate leaders as populist, approachable, having good integrity and capability, and capable of producing policy or program that respond to public complaints. The loss of public trust in Indonesia to strong political figure has prompted the Javanese people to seek a new figure as the presidential candidate in 2024 presidential election. That's it from us, and thank you.